pregnancy clinics have spawned all across the United States. They're doing a fantastic job. Well, there's a law in California that directly threatens the basic First Amendment rights of these pro-life pregnancy clinics. And the case is now pending before the United States Supreme Court with regards to whether or not this law is constitutional. We're going to talk about this law because in the end, it'll impact much more than just pro-life pregnancy clinics. So stay tuned for the second half. But in the first half of the show, we want to talk about another pending law. It's a bill that impacts the rights of homeschoolers in a very sinister way. There's so many adjectives I could use to describe this, but it would impact homeschoolers in a very threatening way with regard to their privacy rights, their ability to homeschool safely and assuredly. We have with us here in the studio Rebecca Koksis of CHIA, which is the Christian Home Educators Association. It's a California-based organization.
Right.
And we also have with us via telephone Mike Smith, who's the head of HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And they do, of course, a fantastic work as well on a national scale with regards to homeschoolers. But first, I want to talk to Rebecca and address to her with her about this question about this pending law. It's AB 2756. Now, Rebecca, my understanding of this law is that we're talking about something that will authorize the state of California, what we presently see as drafted, now may get amended, but it's something that allows the government to be able to come into homeschooling families twice a year and be able to investigate, interrogate these families and decide whether or not they find that family safe enough and adequate enough, and the circumstances sufficient enough to allow these children to continue with that homeschooling program and to be homeschooled. Am I exaggerating at all?
No, I don't think you are at all. And the irony of it is the investigation is supposed to take place by the fire marshal of all people. You'd think that this would be the Department of Education or maybe Child Protective Services, but they want the fire marshal to do this. It's not an exaggeration. It's an egregious violation of our constitutional right to be free in our own home. And it's and I think homeschoolers, private homeschoolers are particularly freedom-loving people,
right?
And do know their constitutional rights and really have no intention to let this stand.
Right. In fact, one thing I like about homeschoolers is those kids know the Constitution better than anyone. I mean,
that's right.
I mean, they read and know the Constitution, I think, more than most attorneys in the United States, which is pretty eye-opening.
So they're exceptional students, I'll tell you.
Yeah, they really are. And also, I understand that this bill, which could become law in California and could impact other states. I'm going to talk to Mike a little bit about that later on. But it also allows the Department of Education to get into the private information and database, this private information about homeschooling families as well.
Correct.
I mean, how do homeschoolers feel about that?
Correct. Well, it's interesting to me that they feel they have to codify, so to speak, homeschooling to get to know us better. We've been here for more than 30 years. Let's talk. We don't need a law. And private homeschoolers are private. They don't want to be a part of a database or a collection system. They are each homeschool is unique and independent. And to try to do that is again, another invasion of their privacy.
Right. And, and we at Pacific Justice Institute, we deal with crises dealing with Child Protective Services or social workers, as they're called in other states, trying to threaten to take kids from families, often homeschooling families, and we give emergency counsel to help protect those kids. I see this as opening the door for social workers, having pretexts to come in and zealously take kids wrongfully from families. And what we see by studies is that most kids that are taken by social workers today should not be taken. They're actually worse off And so I know that has to also be a concern of many homeschooling families as well.
Right, absolutely, and just being investigated makes it undermines the family. You know, it scares the children. It undermines the parents' authority with the children, and they're traumatized.
Very traumatized.
And for no good reason, because they're wanting to have this inspection just because of an educational choice. There's no reason to believe that there's any law being broken. There's no reason to believe that children are endangered. It's specifically because they choose to homeschool, and that's discrimination.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's very important people understand how serious this is and how this would really magnify and exponentially, I think, increase this threat to homeschoolers. Right. Now, Rebecca, you work with a lot of homeschoolers.
Yes.
You're in the field. You're in the trenches, okay?
That's right.
Tell me, if this became law, this bill, and we were not successful in getting it struck down in the courts, how would homeschoolers in California respond to this? What would they do?
Right. Well, I shudder to think that should actually happen.
Yes.
But I know many homeschoolers have talked about moving out of state. They so regard their freedom that they would leave. They would change jobs.
Wow.
They would leave the state. They would find another state that had less regulation.
Right.
Because this is the way they feel that they're supposed to be raising their children.
Yeah, and that's the feedback that I've received from my limited scope from home educators is that they wouldn't put up with it. I mean, how could you continue to live in a state where the courts and the legislators and the courts say that it's okay for government to come pouncing on your door, invade your home at any time, and investigate your family and question your child behind closed doors?
Right.
That's horrific. We already have tremendous problems with CPS or social workers already abusing their discretion, which is outrageous. But yet we would have this magnified. I would, if I was a homeschooler, I'd leave California. Right.
And the scary thing about it is, as Mike already mentioned, that if this passes in California, nobody's safe.
Right.
So it really doesn't matter what state you run to. Well, maybe Texas. But, nobody is safe. Your home is no longer your sanctuary. It's not sacred any longer. So we have to win this.
Yes, definitely.
There's really no question about it.
Definitely. Now, many people don't understand how many people homeschool in the United States and how many in particular homeschool in the state of California. How many roughly homeschool in the United States?
I think 1.5 million are the numbers that I've read so far.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's huge. Right. How about in the state of California?
State of California, private homeschoolers alone count to be about 200,000.
200,000?
Yes.
Wow. I mean, just think what impact that would have on the real estate market.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
How many houses would instantly come up for sale? Mm-hmm. What that would happen to the economy, to business. A lot of these homeschoolers, they're people who own their own businesses.
Right.
And
lots of small business owners.
A lot of capital would leave the state of California. I understand last year about $85 billion went from the state of California to the state of Texas. This would just really impact California just from an economic perspective as well. And, of course, the lives and stability of as far as families, children being impacted, churches. I'm sure many of them are churchgoers.
Yes.
This would
pastors.
Pastors. It would have a huge impact in the state of California. So this is something to be taken very, very seriously.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it transcends the homeschool community. Although we've been calling out for homeschoolers to contact their assembly or their legislators and also the authors of these bills. I mean, this is going to have a ripple effect. So we have to get the word out beyond the homeschool community. So I appreciate you letting us come and talk about this here.
Yes. Well, I once again, Rebecca, I really appreciate what you're doing with regard to CHIA.
Right.
Now, Mike Smith, you're from the head of HSLDA. Thank you for joining us on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Now, we at Pacific Justice have worked with HSLDA before on a homeschooling case, a very critical case, where the three judges declared it was illegal to homeschool in California unless you had a teacher credential. If you were not a credentialed teacher, you could not homeschool in California. We at Pacific Justice defended the homeschooling program for the homeschooling family. HSLDA represented one of the parents. We petitioned for a rehearing of the case. The 3 judges, appellate judges, did rehear the case, and they reversed themselves. I mean, I've never seen that happen in my lifetime, but they did. And for a long time, homeschoolers have since felt really secure and protected to homeschooling in California. Mike, what would happen if this became law and was not unsuccessfully challenged in court? What are we looking at here?
Well, of course, the one you're talking about, which is 2756 by Assemblyman Medina, that would be the fire inspections. Of course, I think we could win that, Brad, on the Fourth Amendment issue, but if it wasn't defeated, I think we'd have to move out of America, quite frankly. But the thing about the Fourth Amendment issue and the fire inspections, if that wasn't stricken by a court, then essentially a right to be secure in a person's home without unreasonable search and seizure would mean nothing.
Right.
And so that would apply to everybody then at that point, not just homeschooling families, but anybody.
Right.
So the warrant provision would be gone, the whole thing. So I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact that some legislator has the nerve to actually introduce it in California means that maybe, let's say it got before the Ninth Circuit, we'd probably lose, wouldn't we, Brad?
Right. You're right. You're right.
But who knows? But, yeah, that's bad enough. But I want to go back to something you said, which is interesting. It really bears on what we're doing here today. So the case you're talking about, In re Jonathan L., was 2008. And in that case, as you know, homeschooling was declared legal via the private school exemption. That settled it. Now, it was a little uncertain until then. And as you recall, there were briefs filed. These are called friend of the court briefs. And one brief was filed by the Attorney General, who at that time was their current governor, Brown.
Right.
And the other was Governor Schwarzenegger, the Terminator.
Right.
And I just want to read to you something that they said, and you're familiar with this. And they said, quote, recognizing that homeschooling has a long and positive history in California and across the nation, the state of California provides a broad statutory framework that authorizes and regulates the practice. The legislature, no doubt, in response to and recognition of the evolution of successful homeschooling programs in California and the growing number of Californians who have successfully homeschooled their children, repeatedly has taken steps to broaden the potential avenues for legal homeschooling. Now, this is just 2008. So what has happened between 2008 and now? Only one thing, and that was the Turpin case, where there are strong allegations that a homeschool family, no doubt they were homeschooling, they filed a private school affidavit, were actually, chaining their children and starving them to some extent.
Yeah.
So based upon that one family, now we have 2 pieces of legislation, we'll talk about the second in a minute, that have been filed that basically would reverse what Governor Brown said when he was Attorney General and the governor said in 2008, and nothing else I know of has changed.
Yeah, and if
no
the law
other
was
families have caused any problem homeschooling in California.
Oh, you're right. And
so this is ludicrous what's happening now.
Right, and if the law was simply enforced presently as it should be, that is proper review and involvement of the community to report things, CPS would have had the proper tools to be able to protect those kids as they should in those kind of circumstances where you in fact have indeed a true reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect. So we don't need this new law, and we don't need the government coming into private or homeschooling when the stats are so terrible with public schools. They need to clean their own house out first. And yet this would be an egregious violation of Fourth Amendment rights, and I'm really glad you mentioned that earlier. Mike, I think that as this case, if this goes to court, I think in the end that in fact homeschoolers will prevail before the United States Supreme Court, thanks partially to President Trump's appointment of Neil Gorsuch. But we shouldn't have to go there, and we're hopeful that it will in fact be defeated.
Well, that's the key to it. And of course, Brad, we just need every California homeschooler to get active. And we're suggesting people need to call Medina's office and tell him just to drop the bill. Just drop it. There's no need for it. You know?
There is no need for it.
Yes. You need to know that there's another bill that's been filed, Brad. It's called 2756. Strike that, 2926 by Assemblyman Eggman.
Yes.
And this bill is very interesting. It would require the superintendent of public instruction to convene a committee for the purpose of studying homeschooling with the idea that we need to tighten up on homeschoolers in the area of health and safety, meaning some kind of pre-screening before you'd be able to homeschool. Secondly, in the area of curriculum direction, you know what that means.
Oh, yeah.
And thirdly, they're looking at the possibility of actually requiring our homeschool parents to be either college graduate or even a certified teacher.
Yeah. Well, Mike, that is outrageous, and I agree. We need to stand up to that as well. And folks, if you're homeschooling, I encourage you to check out HSLDA, their website, hslda.org, to keep up with what they're doing as well. And before we finish up, Rebecca, you're with CHEA, Christian Home Educator Association. I assume that's CHEA.org?
CHEA, the word of, or OFCA. So CHEAOFCA.org.
And I encourage people in California to check out your website. It's a wonderful organization. Folks, if we're not united, particularly as homeschoolers, we're in trouble.
Right.
And one thing I love about CHEA is you guys are working to help make sure homeschoolers are educated and united. And of course, we at Pacific Justice Institute and HSLDA are here to serve the homeschoolers here in the state of California. It's a privilege to do so.
Oh, well, thanks for having us on. We appreciate it, Brad.
Very good. Thank you very much. So, folks, get involved and make a difference. But understand, what happens in California doesn't stay in California. And it could be happening at a state near you. So be informed and be involved.
So my name is Adelmo. When I was out there preaching, people didn't like the message and they called the police. I'm thankful to God for using the Pacific Justice Institute to keep me out there preaching the Word of God.
We at the Pacific Justice Institute are handling more and more cases just like Adelmo's, where people are being victimized because of intolerance because of their faith. We're committed to defending the fundamental civil rights of individuals, and we'd love to serve you and your community without charge. If you decide to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, we really appreciate that. And we have a wonderful gift of appreciation. On our website, pacificjustice.org or pji.org, we have a wonderful gift of appreciation. There are opt-out forms. You can download these, and it helps protect your children from horrific things that are taking place in public schools. Different agendas dealing with sexual orientation, sex education, philosophies, attitudes, invasion of family privacy. All these things are addressed with these opt-out forms, and they're so important as we look at public schools more and more becoming assaulting public families throughout the United States. So we strongly encourage you to take advantage of this and to contact us at our website. Once again, it's pji.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Go to our resources and download these opt-out forms, whether for your children, your grandkids, or someone you know. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to help protect your children if you have your children in public schools or charter schools anywhere in the country. We have with us on the line one of our attorneys, Matt McReynolds, to update us on a very important case that we have pending right now before the United States Supreme Court. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brad. Always a pleasure.
Well, Matt, there was a very important case, and it's involving a California law dealing with pro-life pregnancy clinics and how it actually infringes upon the basic First Amendment rights of pregnancy clinics. I want you to talk about that and how this case came about, and then we'll talk about what happened before the Supreme Court.
Well, Brad, for the last 3 years now, Pacific Justice Institute has been involved in this battle over Assembly Bill, or AB 775 in California. And what that law did, among other things, was it requires pro-life pregnancy clinics to post signs and notices and distribute information to people coming into their clinics, telling them where they can go to get free or taxpayer-subsidized abortion. If you can imagine that, pro-life clinics promoting taxpayer-funded abortion. That's what the state of California is requiring of the clinics, and that's why we took this to court, and we've been battling in court the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I like the fact you mentioned 3 years, and why we're defending these pro-life clinics without charge, right?
That's right, Brad. And we started this even before we went to court. We were involved in the legislative process.
Right.
Right here in Sacramento. We fought this on the ground in the legislature, and then when that didn't succeed, we went to court.
Yeah, and we really take that seriously here at Pacific Justice Institute. So we don't just wait for it to become a problem, become law, and then fly in and file a lawsuit. We're from the get-go. We listen to our watchdogs all across the country. So when there's something pending before a legislature, we don't hesitate to step in and give our analysis and our warnings to those legislatures as to the dangers of that legislation, either from a constitutional perspective or from a public policy perspective when it comes to religious freedom, parents' rights, to the sanctity of human life. I think it's important people also understand, Matt, that this law is not just impacting entities that are receiving, say, grants and money from the government. We're talking here about private ministries, pro-life pregnancy clinics, ministering to people without charge, receiving no money from the government. And I want you to explain why this is so important from a broader perspective to religious freedom and free speech for other entities as well.
Yeah, and that's an important point, Brad, because we brought this out in court. We said, the government has all kinds of ways that it can regulate in this area. It has vast resources to promote its own messaging about abortion. It has all kinds of regulations it can impose on its own funding of entities. And the court said, well, no, we get all that. But because your clients don't take government funding, we have to find another way to control them and to regulate them. And that argument was actually presented in court, and it's just astounding in its implications for the nonprofit sector and for religious ministries.
Yeah, I mean, if they can do this, folks, with nonprofit pro-life pregnancy clinics, then down the road, we could see the government going after other ministries, parachurch ministries, maybe even churches and synagogues if there's something about their hiring and they want to have a big sign posted. I mean, there is so much writing on this case in terms of precedents with regard to the protection of the free exercise rights under the First Amendment as well as the free speech rights under the First Amendment. We at Pacific Justice take this very seriously. Now, we took on this case. We argued it before the federal district court. Unsuccessfully, the court ruled in favor of the state of California and upheld this legislation. Then we took it under appeal before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And once again, not a favorable decision. And then we filed a petition to the United States Supreme Court. What's going on now?
Yeah, so Brad, what happened was after Pacific Justice Institute initially filed suit, there were other suits that were filed, and these cases all traveled together up the chain to the Ninth Circuit and then to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so the U.S. Supreme Court picked out one of those cases on which it held oral arguments very, very recently. But our case is pending alongside that right there at the U.S. Supreme Court, and they'll all be decided together in a blockbuster decision that we're expecting to come down by the end of the term in June. So what happened recently with the oral arguments is critically important for our case.
Right. Now, let's talk about the oral arguments that took place, Matt. Obviously the Supreme Court sometimes is not very open. It's sometimes hard to tell where they're coming from on cases, and we've seen big surprises on outcomes from what people expect versus what actually happens. So it's sort of, we're not saying this is what's going to happen, but what were some of your observations that we took from the oral arguments that took place before the Supreme Court recently?
Well, the remarkable thing about the oral arguments, Brad, was that the justices did seem to be tipping their hands maybe more than usual in the degree to which they were skeptical about various aspects of California's law. And people like Justice Kennedy, who's often the swing vote in cases like this, people who tend to play their cards close to the vest. It was particularly harsh on the government's attorney and his questioning, and it's really hard to see the court upholding this law. In fact, we could even see not just a 5-4 decision. We might see something more like a 6-3 decision striking down the law, or even a 7-2 type of decision, because the state had such a hard time justifying certain aspects of it.
Yeah, I was very impressed with that. And, many people say, well, there's the left side of the court and the right side of the court. But we've seen some surprises at times from justices on the left side of the court siding with the right side. And we've seen some justices, unfortunately, also from the right side of the court switching. I know Chief Justice Roberts, a surprise switch at the last minute, dealing with the Obamacare ruling. And then we also have seen, of course, Justice Kennedy sometimes switch to the left side to our dismay at times. But I think this is going to be one where we have a much better shot at seeing justices shift from the left side of the court. And Kennedy, of course, that's very important. It looks very promising with regards to Justice Kennedy. And I'm very excited about that. And, of course, I'm also very excited about the bigger picture, which is the direction of the Supreme Court. Thanks to this President Donald Trump, the courts are having fantastic justices appointed at the federal district court level as well as the circuit court level, and of course also at the Supreme Court level, which we saw with Neil Gorsuch. I think that there's a very good chance we're going to see at least 1 or 2 more appointments by this president. And I know we at Pacific Justice Institute find that very, very important because there's so many cases, ugly, outrageous cases like this one that are on their way to the Supreme Court. And if we have a Supreme Court that respects the Constitution of the United States, which they frankly all should, but if we have a Supreme Court that will respect the Constitution of the United States, then, Matt, I believe that we have a really incredible opportunity, a window in our lifetime to see case law precedent set that can impact and defend religious freedom and the sanctity of human life and parents' rights and free speech like we haven't seen in decades. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. I'm very excited about this case because of the impact. And I also want to be just very thankful to you, Matt, and the other attorneys who have worked so hard on this case because it is so important. We don't just, take on, quick, flashy cases. We take on cases that take a lot of work. And after the cameras stop flashing and the video screens are turned off, we at Pacific Justice are still there in the trenches. And this case is a classic example of that. And I know our clients, the pro-life pregnancy clinics we're representing, are very appreciative as well. And also I want to say how appreciative we are of people out there who are listening to this broadcast who support our work at Pacific Justice, because we couldn't do it unless we had the support of people out there. Matt, I'd say we handle about several thousand requests for assistance a year, don't we?
Yeah, we get in new requests on a daily basis, Brad, so there are always new challenges, always new opportunities to respond to, sometimes in a very short turnaround time. Right.
And we're sort of unique in that we don't just take on just the high-profile cases. People ask us about how we compare with this group or that group. We're very unique, and all those wonderful groups doing great work, but we're very unique in that we work hard to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road, that everyone gets help, that we don't just cherry-pick those few high-profile cases. And we also work hard to get involved in areas of law that others won't touch, dealing with parental rights and other areas that we see a need for that may not be as high profile. So we really work hard all across the country to make sure that no one's left on the side of the road, and that's a very unique role that we play. And I want to thank you and the many hundreds of volunteer-affiliated attorneys who are a part of that cause, a part of that team to make a difference. Matt, thank you again for the work you're doing, and I encourage people to continue to pray for our cases, to go to our website to get our case updates, and always remember to lift our attorneys and our cases up in prayer, because at the end of the day, that is the deciding factor. So thanks again, Matt, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Brad.
Take care. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.